This seems to be an unexpected but pretty clear ruling against the president on a statute that has really never been used the way Trump attempted to use it. Ellie, what do you make of just how clear and I thought simple, frankly, the Roberts ruling was, and the fact that it was 6-3?
So this is a what goes around comes around moment in the law. If you applauded when the Supreme Court struck down Joe Biden's student debt program in 2023, you can't boo this, because the legal theory that was used here is almost exactly the same, which is if Congress is going to delegate some of its power over to the president, which they can do, they have to specifically say what they're authorizing him to do in the law they pass if the president's going to then use it to do something of massive economic or political impact. And the 6-3 ruling, by the way, people hear 6-3, they think, oh, must be the typical 6-3. This was not the typical 6-3. You had Chief Justice Roberts, you had Neil Gorsuch, and you had Amy Coney Barrett joining with the three liberals to form the majority. So whatever one thinks, you guys will get to the economics of it and the politics of it. But legally, this is a sound decision according to the precedent that's already been set.
Well, let's get to the economics of it, because essentially they're just saying, look, this is not the statute to do what you want to do, and particularly if what you want to do is just random tariffs on every country in the world at whatever number you want it to be. There are other things that you can do. It's just not this.
Yeah, so let's back up 1 second. This is strictly having to do with IEPA. This does not have to do with a sweeping tariff rebut from the Supreme Court. IEPA only enables the president to block trade or stop trade with countries. He cannot gain one single dollar from the IEPA ruling. The other tariffs in place, which are about half of what's in place, has not been touched by the Supreme Court. He has a constitutional right to have those tariffs in place, and he's now going to replace the IEPA tariffs that were put in place, which, by the way, were put in place mainly with China, Mexico, and Canada in order to secure our borders and stop the flow of fentanyl into the country. This was part of his negotiation. So we're going to take the IEPA away, which the Supreme Court ruled on today. He's then going to use Section 232, Section 301, Section 122, which, by the way, he already enacted Section 121 tonight with a sweeping 10% tariff, and just replace the IEPA tariffs. That's really what we need to focus on here. This was not a sweeping rebut of President Trump's tariffs. This was IEPA only.
I guess I disagree on a host of dimensions. One dimension that seems really, really important is, while it's true that you're already starting to see the president talk about other trade authorities and, in fact, invoke other trade authorities to try to replicate some of these IEPA tariffs that were struck down this morning, the reality is there is a lot more process that is required to be able to effectuate those other types of trade authorities. The existing 10% across the board tariffs that were levied tonight, those are only going to be in place for 150 days and only will stay in place if Congress authorizes them to continue. So this is a really significant ruling, and it's a really significant ruling because from a legal perspective, you had a court who stood up to the president and said the power to tax and the power to spend rests with Congress and Congress alone. I do agree with you from an economic perspective. If you think about what this ruling really means, there have been about $140 billion of IEPA tariffs that have been levied in the last year. Those tariffs have fallen through to consumers in the form of higher prices. And if and when we see any refunds, and again, the decision isn't clear about exactly what process that would undertake, even if they were to do refunds, those would go to firms and not to the American consumers. And so I actually do think this is quite significant from the consumer's perspective because they're unlikely to see any relief.
Well, let me just take two quick points. First, from the consumer perspective, we have not seen any inflationary pressures from tariffs. That is null and void.
That is definitely not true.
That is very true.
And my
the true inflation numbers are close to 1% right now. So let's leave that on the table. I just want to say one thing. The semantics of a tax versus a tariff is in question here. All right. The president has the constitutional right to tariff, not to tax. And the
Supreme Court settled that issue, or they answered that point today. And they made it very clear that in this case, a tariff is a tax. That is, and both are in the hands of Congress.
And that is not true. A tax and that's semantics.
How is that semantics?
Because we already have the tariff law of the Tariff Act of 1962 and 1974, which gives the president the right to control imports via.
Okay, but what is a tariff?
A tariff
What
is
a tariff?
A tariff is a fee charged to another country.
Okay.
Tax.
No.
No, it's not charged to another
That's
country.
the semantics.
Tax on the
Tax.
importers.
A tariff is a what?
It is a fee charged. We cannot tax a foreign
A
country. We
tariff
can tax
is a
citizens.
fee charged to who?
A foreign country.
No, it is not.
What is
Okay.
I'll tell you, hey, well, I'll
Tariff is
answer that.
not
I'm not even an economic expert. The importers, I have a friend who imports T-shirts and sneakers from overseas. He pays the tariff, not China.
Is there any evidence? I can't believe you just said that. Any evidence that a foreign government has paid Donald Trump's tariffs?
We're talking about producers in foreign countries. We're not
Tariffs are paid by who?
Tariffs can be paid by many.
They are
can be paid by the
corporations.
importers.
They are
could
paid
be.
by companies. Some of them are foreign companies, but some of them are American companies. Here's one corporation. This is actually the plaintiff in this case. Here's what he says he wants to see.
And they know exactly what they took from us, when and why and how much. And they can just reverse the gears and send it back to us. It's our money. They took it unlawfully. They have to return it. And I'm not crying for them that they find it inconvenient.
They said they spent $10 million paying Trump's tariffs that we now know are illegal. And on top of that, just to circle back to what we were talking about, the CBO, this is one of many reports on this, but the CBO just recently said U.S. businesses will absorb 30% of the import price increases by reducing their profit margins. The remaining 70% will be passed through to consumers by raising prices. So the net effect of the tariffs will be to raise consumer prices by the full portion of the cost of the tariffs borne domestically, 95%. So look, at the end of the day, he's a business owner. You can't tell him he didn't bear the cost of tariffs. He wrote the check.
Well, which is it? You said all of it was passed through the consumers. You said that most of it was absorbed by some of the companies. It sounds like maybe it might be a little bit of both. I mean, how do you refund this? I have no idea. I mean, this is a total mess. You're talking about massive amount of money.
How did they charge it?
And
they can refund what they charged.
I guess, but if you want to go into the Treasury and start writing checks on this, it feels, and the court acknowledged that it feels like it's going to be a bit of a mess. I assume, Ellie, there'll be massive amount of litigation about this over the next couple of years. I will just say, politically today, it was a big breaking news day, but I just think we ought to acknowledge something. This is a properly functioning government today. The President of the United States, the head of the executive branch, made a policy decision. The Supreme Court, that renders legal opinions about these kinds of decisions, made a decision. They said you can't do that. The President of the United States said, okay, I agree, and I will acknowledge your decision. I am going to use a different statute to try to do what I want to do. This is properly functioning government. And I'll tell you one more thing. For every Democrat and every media person that has gone on for the last year or two about how the Supreme Court is a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald Trump, that it's not independent, that it does whatever he says to do, obviously that narrative was obliterated today. So to me, I thought the ruling was sound. I think the president is sound to try other statutes. And I think the narratives about the court not being independent and the president not obeying the court were totally blown up today.
That was a very charitable explanation of what took place today, Scott. You should be paid a lot of money from the Trump administration for helping to.
Oh no, I get paid a lot of money here.
Well, I know you
just
do,
to be clear.
and in other places too. But you should be paid by the Trump administration for what you said, because the reality is that the president didn't just accept the ruling like you said he did.
Yes, he did.
He got up
He
there.
acknowledged it and accepted
He
it.
got up there in the press conference today, and he attacked the U.S. Supreme Court justices. He said that they should be embarrassed for their families for making a decision that stood up to him. He attacked them and said they were disloyal and unpatriotic. He said they were disloyal to the Constitution even. That's more than disagreement. That's irresponsible rhetoric. And the problem is, Scott, even though today the Supreme Court did the right thing, according to everyone here at the table, apparently, except maybe you, Anthony, the truth is that this is the first major decision where they have actually disagreed with the president on any of his priorities. So yes, they got one right, but that doesn't negate everything else that they've done. Donald Trump doesn't like to govern. Donald Trump likes to rule by decree, and the Supreme Court finally stood in and said you can't do that on this one issue.
Quick, if I could. I mean, the reason there's not National Guard on the streets in Chicago right now is the Supreme Court blocked that too. And I think Trump's about to go on a bit of a losing streak with the court. I mean, between today He's going to lose birthright, I believe, birthright citizenship eventually. I also think he's going to lose his effort to fire Lisa Cook off the Fed. So I think, to Scott's point, I think the narrative that the Supreme Court is automatically in Trump's pocket and always has been, I think it is overblown. And I think they're disproving that now and will continue over the next several months.
Yeah, it's interesting because they do push the envelope on this stuff, and they could easily have, to your point, I mean, there are all kinds of different statutory authorities for the president to do all kinds of different things, and he's going to use some of them now. And they could have tried to do it that way. I don't know. Do you have a theory? I have a theory, but I'm curious if you have a theory about why the Trump administration decided to do it this particular way.
Yeah, I have a bit of a theory, which is that of all of the trade authorities that exist to support the president's agenda, this is the one that has the least set of requirements attached to it. It is the one where, with a stroke of a pen on any particular day, and in fact, we've seen it on 60 days so far in this Trump administration, you are able to change tariff rates because you see a commercial you don't like, or your adversary or ally does something that you don't agree with. And I think the challenge with all of these other approaches, some of which would actually require the president to go to Congress and try to legislate the trade agenda, as has always been done historically, don't afford you that same flexibility. And I think that flexibility might sound like it's attractive, but actually, Scott, to your point, I think today you did see government function and our institutions function the way they're supposed to. But something that you also saw was the reintroduction of incredible volatility into our trade policy. What are businesses supposed to be planning for? What is the tariff rate likely to be next week, next month, 6 months from now? How do consumers plan for that? And how do our allies think about us in negotiations when it's not at all clear what authorities or the extent to which they're legally viable pathways to effectuate some of these policies?
I think the last point you made is one of the most important for how the president moves forward here. Because if you talk to him about this, beyond just the economics, he believes these tariffs and the ability for him to unilaterally do it is his biggest diplomatic tool. He thinks that it's been huge in trade negotiations. He thinks it's helped him solve some of these peace agreements. He thinks it gives the American president, in any room that that person is in, this massive cudgel against other countries to extract outcomes that we want on a number of fronts. So I think the last point you made is very true.
And he's wrong about that.
Why is he wrong about it?
Chief Justice Roberts said this: the president asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it. He's pretty crystal clear. That's the scope. There's a reason that, according to Chief Justice Gorsuch and 6 other Supreme Court justices, Congress does not give that power to the president. And it has to do with the fact that, as we just discussed, tariffs, like taxes, cost people money. Money comes out of their pockets and goes to the Treasury. And that is a power that belongs to Congress. And if Congress, which is, controlled by the president's party, supports the president's agenda, and if these tariffs are so popular and such a key to economic prosperity, 2 questions. Why are they so unpopular? Why do Americans say, 56% say they hurt the economy, and why won't Congress just codify them?
So what I would say that, first of all, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the president the right to work on international affairs, manage international affairs, and trade, period. Hard stop. He has the right to implement tariffs. That's not the question here. The question is IEPA. To loop back to the benefits that we've seen.
Did you hear anything that I just read?
I did, but it's actually
listen,
not
I
accurate.
understand what you're saying.
They did just rule on the narrow statute.
Just a second. I understand the context of what you're saying in that they're ruling on IEPA. But what Chief Justice Roberts is saying is that what Trump is asserting is that using national security as a justification to impose tariffs of any size, scope, and duration is not constitutional. He says that very clearly here.
That is IEPA. That's fine.
Okay. So we're in agreement on that. The president has limited authorities that are delegated by Congress to impose trade restrictions under certain circumstances, under other statutes, but it is not broad, it is not unlimited, and it is not forever. Correct?
No, that's actually not correct. He has congressional authority to issue and implement tariffs under Section 122.
Under limited
They
under
each have
limited
their own limits
scope that
and
is
their own
delegated by Congress. That is the only
Section
point that I'm making.
232, for example, gives him the ability to put tariffs at 50% across the board.
The only point that I'm making is
they're substantial.
The only point that I'm making is that Congress determines what powers he has in those.
They've already determined that as well.
Anthony, you're making the argument that might have been okay yesterday, but today it lost, so it's not the law anymore.
He's saying that there's statutes that already exist.
Oh, I know.
The president's going to pivot to
which
other
is fine.
Statutory authorities.
Yes.
Now,
No, but
if he
Abby's
does
right, those
that,
are narrow.
maybe somebody ends up challenging that, and they
Sure,
are
let me
different
make-
scope.
let me make-
But the statutes already
You have
exist.
to actually meet the requirements of those statutes.
Right.
He
Yes.
can't just say, I want 50% tariffs on the whole world. I'm just going to put it under this statute. If he could have done that, he would have done it. But he didn't. Those statutes are narrow. He has to meet certain requirements, and those requirements are dictated by Congress, not by the president.
Think about it this way.
So that's the only point.
IEPA, the law that he tried to use today, would have been a sledgehammer for him to put in tariffs. Instead, that's been taken away, and now he's going to have to use a ball-peen hammer instead. The statutes that are left for him are much more restrictive. Still painful and still effective, but much more fine, much more limited in their scope.
Let's hit pause real quick, because there's more on the other side. We'll talk about the choice words that the president had for his own handpicked justices, calling them an embarrassment to their families. Plus, the administration has a truth problem, especially when it comes to ICE, and now judges are calling them out for it. Tonight, it appears that the honeymoon period between President Trump and his handpicked Supreme Court justices is over, at least for two of them. Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch are now officially on Trump's bad list after they sided with the liberal justices to torpedo his tariffs. Now, Trump took that personally and didn't hold back his frustration.
And I'm ashamed of certain members of the court. They're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. They don't want to do the right thing. They're afraid of it. The court meant it because the court doesn't show great spirit toward our country, in my opinion.
Real respect for the institution there on the part of the president. The Wall Street Journal editorial board blasted Trump tonight in an editorial. President Trump owes the Supreme Court an apology to the individual justices he smeared on Friday and to the institution itself. Mr. Trump doubtless won't offer one, but his rant in response to his tariff defeat at the court was arguably the worst moment of his presidency. Scott, I think you were right that this is a moment that illustrates, yes, the wheels of democracy are still turning, but the president, according to the Wall Street Journal, just showed his, other side.
Well, he gets very upset about this topic. I mean, I've talked to him about it, interviewed him about it, and he's certainly spoken about it publicly. This is his longest and most closely held political view, that tariffs are good, that they help the president affect positive outcomes for the country, and the idea that it would be restrained from him is hateful to him. I went back and listened to an interview I did with him on September 2nd of last year, and he was talking about how weak and poor this would make the United States if this ruling were to come down. I listened to his entire press conference today. I was thinking about if I were advising him what I would have told him to do. I almost think I wouldn't have done anything. I think I would have just said, okay, thanks, and signed the executive order for the other statutory.
You would have told him to do nothing.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have said a word because they had a plan B. And if you listen to the arguments when they were made, it was obvious the court was headed in this direction. And so part of the way you could have played it today is to simply have done nothing. Said, thank you, Supreme Court. By the way, here are my new statutory authorities, and we were going to re-implement these tariffs. And I believe the way it all shakes out, the rates are all roughly the same. And so that would have been maybe a cooler and more confident way to have played it.
They're the same as, just to be clear, the same as
Roughly.
before.
Yeah, my colleagues and I at the budget lab at Yale, we actually just crunched these numbers, and they're coming out tonight. So I can tell you, basically, the effective tariff rate as of this morning before this decision was something like 16.9%. Now it's something like 13.3%. So you're like roughly in the same space. But remember, Scott, this is only for 150 days unless Congress authorizes these tariffs. And so you are at a roughly similar level, but you're not really likely to be there because Congress has already shown explicitly that they're not really likely to go along with this president's tariff agenda.
And I would also say, and I know you have some responses to him, but just on that, I mean, there are some tariffs that are significantly higher than that. So we average things out, and it looks the same. But for for certain parts of the world or certain products, it might be a significant difference
Absolutely.
in rate.
Yeah,
But Ellie.
I wish the president would have received and followed your advice, Scott. It would have been vastly preferable to what he did. Plenty of presidents have been plenty disappointed by Supreme Court decisions before, but we've never seen someone lash out quite like this, calling the justices individually embarrassments to their families. I couldn't believe he said that. Disgrace to the nation, lapdogs, right? We've never had a president talk like that before. I guess my question, and Scott, maybe you would know, why would he do this? I mean, is it just a temper tantrum? Like, he's not going to influence the justices. There's no way the next time around Amy Coney Barrett or Chief Justice Roberts is going to say, you know, he really intimidated me there. I mean, they have life tenure. They don't care, right? Why does he do this?
I don't know if I agree with you on that, though, even though this is a question for Scott.
I want to hear that.
I do think he thinks he can intimidate them, and I do think some of them may be intimidated because even though they have life tenure, they also are getting threats. There are judges who are getting threats from his supporters out there, and they're aware of the political climate in which they live. So I don't know if that's part of what he's doing, but I think that I don't think that he can just assume. You can just assume that he's
J.D.
just saying
Vance
that.
also called it lawless, which, to me raised a question of what law does he think is above the ruling of the
Supreme Court.
Well, look, they have a strong political and legal disagreement. It's why they levied the tariffs. It's why they fought it out. It's why they argued what they did in court. And so, and again, this is more than just another ho-hum policy decision that the president made and a stack of other decisions. This is the thing that he cares about the most, which leads to the emotional outburst that he had. It's not true that the justices are simply getting threats from the right. I mean, Justice Kavanaugh was attempted murder by someone from the left. We had Chuck Schumer stand on the front of the Supreme Court and threaten justices by name. You'll reap the whirlwind, if you all will recall. So this is hardly the first time someone's taken on the Supreme Court or raised the specter of threats. I don't think he should attack the Supreme Court. I don't think they can be intimidated. I don't think it works. And I think the court itself, because A, it has a number of his appointees on it, and B, has, I think, distinguished itself as a functioning part of government. I don't think they deserve this kind of abuse. But if you want to know why he did it, it's because he's pissed. This is his number one thing. There's no backing down. He believes in it. He's never wavered on it. He ran on it. This is the thing that defines him apart from other
He's a
presidents,
grown
and
man,
that's
and
why
he's the president,
That's
though.
why, and that's why he did it.
Justice Gorsuch made a comment in his concurring opinion today where he's basically said that if you want these tariffs, if you want these policies, go through the proper legislative process.
He did, yeah.
And I think there's a lesson for Trump. If this is his top priority, why not govern responsibly? Why not try to lead the way presidents are supposed to lead? Why just issue executive orders all the time? It almost feels like he doesn't want to do the hard work of being the president. He just wants to do the quick, to sign the pardon or rename the building or
ask
something.
Anthony one thing. I heard earlier tonight a Republican senator, I think John Kennedy, suggests that if the money went back to the hands of corporations, it would be a massive economic boon for the United States. It could be a win-win situation for President Trump. What do you think?
First of all, I don't know if logistically the money can go back, and the Supreme Court
Well,
obviously
just to be
left that
clear,
open.
Scott Bessent last month said they have the money. It's in the Treasury. If they needed to do it, they could do it. So
It would be difficult. They're redistributing to, I think, 3,000 recipients, or over 3,000 recipients. So, look, the money's in the country, right? So would it be an economic boom? Would it help if we cut the debt and deficit spending? We're doing that. That helps with inflation. That helps with growth.
It's really not doing that, though. Like,
Again, I would
it's-
push back.
it's a
I'm
drop-
watching the
It's a drop in the
inflation
bucket,
number.
right?
No, but we're moving in the right direction. If we were to decrease the trade deficit, all right, which we're doing, we're decreasing the amount of dollars.
Is up, isn't it?
The trade deficit is coming down.
The trade deficit,
the
we have
net
it,
exports is actually a huge input to GDP, which is
the
which
trade
has been-
deficit, according to
Anthony.
2025, is virtually the same as it was in 2024. The trade deficit for goods is higher than it was before the tariffs. So I'm not seeing where Trump is economically winning here, but I guess the question was, if you give companies back the $130-something billion that were taken out of their balance sheets, could that actually help reverse some of the weirdness in the economy that we've been seeing over the last year?
I guess in theory, if the money was going back into the economy and not being sent overseas, sure, that could be
I mean, just to be clear, I can answer a version of this question. So the way that these tariffs are collected, they're collected by those at the ports, by those who are actually bringing in goods into this country, that is American companies. And so if you believe that if you cut taxes for American companies, you see an investment boon, then you believe a version of what Senator Kennedy said, which is that as a result of refunding potentially $140 billion in tariffs, that's going to trickle into the economy in ways that are going to grow it. The thing that pushes in the opposite direction of that is that these tariffs have ultimately been passed down to the American consumer, at least in part, Scott. And that's what estimates say. Somewhere between 50 to 70% of these tariffs are falling on the American consumer in the form of higher prices. That's inflationary. That's bad for the economy. And that won't be negated by any small investment types of increases that you're seeing on the margins as a result of these importers ultimately being able to profit.
All right, everybody. Natasha and Anthony, thank you both for being here with us tonight. Next for us, the Trump administration's troubled relationship with the truth. Now, DHS is having to dial back some of its amped up claims when it comes to ICE. We'll discuss.